Joining me now, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles and former National Security Agency General Counsel Glenn Gerstel. So, Ryan, first to you. FBI Director Chris Wray is expected to urge Congress this afternoon to renew FISA Section 702. What alternative does the Speaker have to try to get this passed? And, you know, he says he's committed to it, but basically Donald Trump tanking it from one side, and now Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, Jim Jordan at the Judiciary Committee. So what chances does he have?
Yeah, I mean, let's first talk about Christopher Wray and the effort that he's going to make to try and convince these members of Congress that 702, the FISA program, are essential to keeping terrorists at bay. This is part of what he's going to say in his opening statement today. He said, our most immediate concern has been that individuals or small groups will draw twisted inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks here at home, akin to the ISIS-K attack that we saw on the Russian concert hall just a couple of weeks ago. And the intel community, the national security leaders, they strongly believe that if FISA were to go away, which it is set to expire, that it would leave gaping holes in their ability to protect the United States. But the problem for Speaker Johnson is that the very folks that need to hear this message the most don't believe people like Christopher Wray. They believe that they're part of the problem, and they believe that FISA needs to go away. They believe heavily in this idea of a deep state, as they call it, even though they don't have a ton of evidence to support those claims. And that makes it very difficult for Speaker Johnson. You're right, Andrea. He does seem to support FISA with these reforms that both Republicans and Democrats have worked on. But there are Republicans that are threatening that if he even brings this to the floor, that they will vote to remove him from office. And the mechanism that he has to get this done is to go around the rules process. Right now, the Republican Party is essentially ungovernable in the House, which means they need to abandon the rules process, go directly to the floor. That requires a two-thirds vote in order to pass. It would mean that it would be propped up by Democrats, and that would make his already shaky standing within the Republican Party even worse. Andrea.
And doesn't that, going around this suspending the rule, doesn't that require a two-thirds vote, not just a majority?
Yes, exactly. It would require a two-thirds vote, and that's why it would require Democrat votes in order to get over the finish line. I mean, it would under any circumstance, but it would obviously fuel this argument that the hard-right Republicans are making that Mike Johnson can't get anything done without Democrats, and therefore he doesn't deserve the job of the speakership. It's why he is in such a difficult position right now.
And now, Glenn, I want to play some of what Chris Wray said earlier this week about what is called the FISA laws, Section 702. I think it's been in effect, was controversial back in 2008. It's been renewed at various times. This is what Chris Wray had to say.
We must also not undercut the effectiveness of this essential tool with a warrant requirement or some similar restriction, paralyzing our ability to tackle fast-moving threats. Bottom line, a warrant requirement would be the equivalent of rebuilding the pre-9/11 wall. 2 decades later, I can assure you that none of our adversaries are holding back or tying their own hands, whether to attack us, to steal from us, to put American national security, our economic security, American lives at risk.
So, Glenn Gerstel, you dealt with this for years over at the NSA. Talk to us about the concerns that people are spreading falsely, according to all of the experts, about privacy concerns, because this is metadata, not conversations, on foreigners overseas.
So there are some appropriate levels of concern about privacy, but the current bill that the Speaker Johnson is trying to bring to the floor would almost totally address any of those concerns, and most importantly, keep in effect what is essentially the nation's most important operational statute for national security purposes. This statute's been in effect for 16 years. It has been controversial because, among other things, some Americans' communications are inadvertently swept up in it, so there's a legitimate concern about that.
If an American is on the
if an American is talking on the other
suspect.
end, not all of the Americans' communications, only if an American just happens to be talking to an ISIS terrorist or a Russian agent or a Chinese espionage agent, etc. Yes, that particular communication might get caught. I would submit we've got a pretty strong interest in learning more about that, right? We'd certainly want to know about who's planning an attack with an ISIS terrorist. But there is a concern. The bill that's currently being talked about, we're not sure if it's going to get to the floor, but that bill presents the most comprehensive set of reforms ever in the history of this statute. It's got some 50-odd provisions that directly address almost every single point that the critics have been talking about.
Didn't Donald Trump reauthorize it in 2018?
So in 2018, after a lot of back and forth with Congress, Congress finally passed it after an extension. Donald Trump signed it. In his signing statement in January, I remember because I was in the office at the time, I remember reading it and seeing it at the time, he said, I would like to extend this law permanently, not even with a temporary extension. I would like to extend this law permanently because it's so important for our nation's security.
And what's happening right now, when we look around at ISIS-K attacking in Moscow, you'd think that Moscow would be very heavily defended, despite a U.S. warning that this was going to happen in that specific location, by the way, according to all of our reporting. And you see a rise of terrorism now, which could be threatening Europe as well as us, because these groups are resurgent.
You couldn't possibly pick a worse time for us to blind ourselves to these threats, whether it's great power competition, increase in terrorism, ransomware, fentanyl trafficking. All of these are topics that Section 702 is specifically aimed at addressing, these threats to our national well-being. So at a time when we are facing greater threats than ever, we now have a group of people in Congress who, I guess if this was an election for a 10th grade class president, we might laugh at it, but the stakes are super high here. They couldn't possibly be higher.
And Ryan, before I let you go, I want to ask you about what's backed up behind FISA, because the speaker is also being threatened that if he goes to Democrats for votes on Ukraine, that Marjorie Taylor Greene will file the motion to vacate and try to get him kicked out of office. So Ukraine money, where President Zelensky has been saying he could lose this war if we do not get this passed. And I was talking to Senator Shaheen yesterday from the Armed Services Committee, and she said, if this is changed in the House to modify it, to put conditions on it, to take Israel out of it, to do whatever, and has to go back to the Senate for another couple of months, it'll be critical, maybe fatal, for Ukraine's hopes of pushing back against the spring offensive from Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the two most difficult issues for Speaker Mike Johnson when it comes to the surveillance program and when it comes to Ukraine funding, because it is that hard right bloc of Republicans that are threatening his job. It is that hard right bloc of Republicans that are most opposed to these two pieces of legislation. And with that slim majority, even though if he put these on the floor, both would probably pass with overwhelming majorities, he runs the risk of alienating that core. That's part of the reason that he's going to Mar-a-Lago tomorrow, to show himself standing shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump, to send a message to those hard right Republicans that he is in good graces with the former president. And whatever he does as it relates to these two pieces of legislation, that isn't going to change. That may still be a tough sell, because many of these hard right Republicans are very much entrenched when it comes to these two issues, and they may make Mike Johnson pay the price if he moves forward. Andrea.
And you can't predict what Donald Trump will say on either of these issues standing next to Speaker Johnson. That's a high-wire act, indeed. Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. And Glenn Gerstel, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.